Good morning, Husker fans, and welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always is Danny Gillette, and we're back for another episode of the Husker Big Red podcast here on the 4th of July, a special Independence Day edition of the Husker Big Red podcast. And on that note, how are you doing this Independence Day, Danny?
Good, just kind of enjoying the day off. Nothing to really write about yet, but there were some pre-fireworks ahead of the 4th of July for Nebraska in terms of recruiting, so I can't wait to talk about those, and I can't believe we're in July already.
Yeah, there definitely were some fireworks this week with a couple of commitments, so we're going to talk about that, maybe who we see committing next for the Huskers, as well as we're going to talk about Andy Staples' 7-0 prediction that has some Husker fans, fired up. So we'll get to all that. Please, before we do, please make sure you hit the subscribe button, get into the comment section, hit the like button, check out HuskerBigRed.com, and let's start with the fireworks earlier this week on Monday. We kind of alluded to it. We knew it was kind of happening Monday. We talked about Jeremiah Jones a little bit, but he did announce his commitment to the Huskers on Monday, and I really like this commitment for the Huskers. A 6'4", 6'5", some people have said 6'6" athlete, about 200 pounds, runs the 100-meter dash in sub 11 seconds. Honestly, when I look at his ranking, I don't know how he's ranked as low as he is, and I know I've said that
change,
about.
I think. Honestly.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. I've seen with a number of these guys. Actually, I think his ranking did move up, and so did Houston Torres, the offensive line commitment. He moved up, a bunch of spots. Brian Tapu, I think, moved up a little bit. So it's interesting how that kind of, how that works a little bit. But anyways, as far as Jeremiah Jones, I think he could play, linebacker. I've talked about, I think linebacker could be his best position, but he could play receiver. He could play safety. I mean, hell, he could play tight end. He could play at a lot of different spots. And this is one of those program gets, and I really like it for Nebraska football.
Yeah, he played everything in high school. He played quarterback, wide receiver. I think he even played a little bit of running back, so he can really do it all. I like him either at safety or linebacker. 6'4", 200 pounds. That type of speed. I mean, he's a really good athlete. I'm not sure how he was ranked so low. Just taking a look at his ranking. Not that rankings are everything, but I think. He was originally ranked as an 87.28, 0.8728, and now he moved up to 0.8785. So that's a change of quite a bit. And but anyway, so his athleticism, I think, is going to be really key for the Huskers here. I predict he'll be a safety, but we already have a lot of guys at safety, so we'll see how that plays out. But just watching his highlights, he was a Swiss Army knife at the high school level, and I'm really excited to see what they do with him. And again, as you mentioned, he has speed, and that's something that this coaching staff loves.
And what's interesting about his ranking is that 24/7 has had him as an 89, like for well over a year. So through all of his rankings updates, so some of the other services kind of catching up. But yeah, 598 overall. In the composite rankings for Nebraska, in the 24/7 sports composite rankings for Nebraska, that makes him one of their highest. It makes him the 4th highest commitment. And a couple of weeks ago, he was unranked in those composite rankings. So that does show, how quickly that can change, how guys can go from being unranked to ranked very quickly. And so I think that was kind of interesting. And I better double check that because
no, you're
right.
Excuse
me. Well, he's 4th in the 27, but if you look at the composite rankings, he's 5th. So just to
those numbers I was reading off for the composite numbers. The top 24/7 rankings, he is an 89 overall, and
he's been there for a while.
Yeah, he's been there since November of last year, so it's pretty consistent. And I could honestly see him move up to a 4-star when all is said and done.
Yeah, he looks like a 4-star to me. And sometimes. You see guys and you're like, how is he not a 4-star recruit? And Jeremiah Jones is one of those. So, I mean, he's out of Murray, Kentucky, which I've never heard of. Maybe that's part of it. But Kentucky does have some pretty talented players. But
decent college program, too. No.
Yeah, they also recruit a lot out of Ohio. But at any rate, so another pickup yesterday, and this one was a little bit unexpected in just the sense that, the crystal ball started coming in kind of late. But Shawn Hammerbeck visited a couple of weeks ago, 6'6", 6'7", some have listed him, out of Winter, South Dakota, 260 pounds. He's played tight end, played defensive end, going to be an offensive tackle. I really like his footwork.
Mhm.
If you watch his huddle highlights, you see him drive blocking people to the ground. I think he needs a lot of work. Obviously a lot of development. 260 pounds. He's going to have to gain about 40 pounds, um, but you can add 40 pounds. You can't teach somebody to be 6'7" and have the kind of athleticism that this guy has. So I think that him and Brian Tapu, I know it's not, David Sanders or whatever, but I think these are two guys that can be developed into future starting tackles for the Cornhuskers.
Yeah, no, I think Hammerbeck's a great get. Like you kind of alluded to, he finishes his blocks. He's very physical. This is something that we've seen over the last couple of classes. Physical linemen who are not afraid to finish plays, not afraid to make blocks, and are not afraid to do whatever they can to create running lanes for the running backs and clean pockets for the quarterbacks. And Hammerbeck, like you mentioned, his size. 24/7 Sports has him listed at 6'6", 260. And so that's just another big body for Nebraska on the offensive line. And, I think even though it was a bit unexpected in terms of time frame, it's still a really nice get for the program. I understand it's not a 4 or 5 star. Those guys will come once we start winning. And quite honestly, we talked about it on Monday. You don't need 5-star offensive tackles all the time. You would like them, but I think there's a lot to work with Hammerbeck here, for example. I think like you said, he is a little bit more of a player who may need development, but at the same time, you're now in a position where you have enough offensive line depth where you can really work with him and get him to where he needs to be. And this coaching staff is also known for their offensive line development, so that's a plus as well.
Yeah, I mentioned it. I wrote something this morning on HuskerBigRed.com kind of talking about the next commitment. But with Shawn Hammerbeck, I mentioned that how Nebraska's got 10 commitments in the last 2 classes at the offensive line. Quite a few, tackle prospects. So it's not like they need him next year. He can have a couple of years, Brian Tapu as well, to kind of develop. And I like that. So I mean, 3 offensive. I know everybody was freaking out about offensive line recruiting like 2 weeks ago. And now we're sitting here with 3, commitments in the top 700 overall. I get that it's not, 4 stars or whatever, but those are 3 guys that can develop into starting players. Matt Rule has talked about, Nebraska recruits NFL players. And I said this earlier, I don't think Nebraska takes somebody unless they see, a path to the NFL for him. Now that path may not be the same as it is for a guy that's ranked in the top 100, but there is still that path. Like Jeremiah Jones, I could definitely see a path for him getting drafted, in a few years if he can live up to that potential. So I see that in these offensive linemen. The development's going to be key, but that's always going to be a key thing for Nebraska. And Matt Rule has said that too. This Nebraska needs to be, the premier development program in all of college football. And I think that they have a chance to do that, and they're recruiting that way as well.
Teams are always looking for offensive linemen in the NFL. You can never have too many offensive linemen. My Patriots, for example, had a terrible offensive line last year, and now we're a mess offensively partly because of the offensive line. But anyway, offensive linemen are always, being coveted. And so I think, this is a chance. I'm not saying that Hammerbeck's going to go to the NFL, but the type of position he plays certainly lends itself to getting to the next level with proper development. And another, kind of side note here, top player in the state of South Dakota in the 2025 class. I know it's not, like a top player in the state of Texas, top player in the state of Florida, but this is another example of Nebraska landing a top player in a state. When you look at, especially Hawaii, we talked about on Monday, they had success with Tamua. I believe he was the top player in the state for the 2024 class. And then Houston Clarina Torres, I believe he was the second overall player in the 2025 class in the state. So although it's not, like I said, although it's not Texas, Florida, those type of areas, that Nebraska's still getting top players in states, which I think is certainly a positive sign.
And with Hammerbeck, had Minnesota offered, Michigan State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, Kansas, so a bunch of those Midwestern schools. That's a recruitment Nebraska should win, but they still did win it. And Kansas State, was a really solid program. They were the team that I was worried about also being pretty close, and they recruit South Dakota pretty well. So I think getting him over Kansas State, especially with the needed offensive tackle, because if you didn't get Shawn Hammerbeck, then you're going to really have to, probably expand the board if you're going to get another tackle. And it seems like Nebraska's really trying to kind of bottleneck this thing and really try to get these players committed here before. I think they want to get their class mostly done before the season starts, kind of like what they did last year. And I don't know exactly what that means for Christian Jones. I mean, not every recruitment is going to be done by then, but for the most part, if you can have most of it done and then start looking ahead to 2026, I think that's what Nebraska wants to do. And I don't see this class getting beyond 20. I think there's like 18 seniors I read. And they've taken a huge class. They have a huge number of freshmen and sophomores. So I think it's going to be a smaller class. And so looking at who could be, the next person to join that, who could be the next commitment, I think Bryson Weber may have a decision date for this weekend. I don't know about Saturday. Okay. See, I wasn't aware of that earlier, but so he's got a decision date for Saturday. Everything's looking like it's going to be Nebraska. 6'2", 175. Another guy, I guess I'm not worried about his ranking. He's 296 in the 24/7 composite rankings. I'm wondering why there's not more action around his recruitment, but that's fine by me. Out of Missouri City, Texas. He runs really well, very long. I love cornerbacks that are 6'1", 6'2", and can run. I mean, that makes it that much harder, especially, if you want to play man coverage, it helps to have a guy out there that's not 5'11" and 5'10". So I really like this commitment. He's probably going to be the next one, I think, but there's some other interesting names out there as well. Will Hawthorne. I mean, who knows with Christian Jones, that commitment could come anytime. So those are some of the names, I guess, that come to mind for Nebraska right now.
And if Jones takes longer, you don't necessarily want to wait necessarily for his commitment. You kind of want to have other options on the board in case things go south. But no, Weber would be an excellent pickup. Depth at secondary is a concern. Obviously, when we landed the corner from USC, right, the transfer, that was a little bit less of a concern, but I still think we need a little bit more depth at corner. And I'm predicting Weber as a next commitment. We should hear Saturday, but I think that would be just another nice get. It's not about necessarily right now landing all the 5-star players. It's about filling in needs, and Weber would certainly fill another need.
Yeah, and like with the offensive line recruiting, I mean, Nebraska's got a bunch of defensive backs, especially last class, and they've got quite a few in this class as well. But I don't think you're going to see, again, as that big of a number. Bryson Weber would be a blue chip prospect, though, and they don't have one in the secondary for this class. And those are the kind of guys you need them. You need those blue chip kind of cornerbacks, and it's hard to replicate that ability, especially at cornerback or pass rush. If there was one. Pass rush is still, I guess, a bit of a concern in this class because they didn't really do super well at edge last year. I was hoping that they could, add some really quality edge players in this class. They did add Malcolm Simpson and Tyson Terry, so they're doing a good job on the defensive line. But if they could add a pass rusher, that would be a positive thing. I think Pierce Mooberry could be that guy, though. I don't know that he's a pure, he strikes me as more of a will and not like a true jack or even, not like a. Because, I mean, Jamari Butler is almost, he's almost a 5 technique and a pass rush defensive end. So it really opens up Nebraska for a lot of different, types of players that they can add. But, I mean, beyond Weber, that linebacker spot's going to be interesting because you got, Christian Jones, you got Will Hawthorne, who's kind of deciding between Nebraska and Iowa State right now. And, would Nebraska take both of those players? I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if they take Will Hawthorne, if that means like they're cooling on Christian Jones. I think it would tell me that they're willing to move on from Christian Jones. And I'm not going to say that they would necessarily, but I don't think they're going to wait forever for the kid, no matter how highly he's ranked.
I mean, we saw that with, I believe it was David Hall last year when Nebraska wanted to, kind of figure out what their wide receiver board was going to look like. And, Rule put in a call to the Hall family and said, you're either in or you're out. We got to make a decision. And, they're not afraid to recruit regardless of their positional needs or who they perceive is in. If you're not in, or if you take a while to make your decision, they're not going to stop and wait for you. They're going to keep recruiting, and that's what you should do. So I think a lot of it just depends on where they see the direction of the Christian Jones decision going, both in terms of time frame and their overall chances of landing him. I think time frame is going to be the bigger X factor here.
Yeah, there's kind of this, like I guess kind of a push back and forth where I'm sure Nebraska, is like, hey, we want that decision, we want that commitment, and he's kind of, hemming and hawing, and there's not as many, I guess, scholarship opportunities available, in the fall.
Mhm.
I don't think Christian Jones is worried about that where he's ranked. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess it gets to that point where you're Nebraska, you're like, hey, either you want to be here or you don't, and we want to sign 20 kids or whatever in this class that want to be here. That is a big part of it. And if you don't, if you're not fully committed to being here, then good luck to you. That really
Mhm.
is Matt Rule's philosophy. I mean, I think that we saw that with Chase Lofton a little bit. I mean, we've seen that with other
Yep.
guys too. It's like, that's a two-way street. And he
Yep.
always says, take all your visits, be sure about that. I mean, that's what Dylan Raiola too, when he was coming, Matt Rule's kind of first question wasn't like, what can I do to, it wasn't trying to like, figure out a way to convince Dylan Raiola to come to
Mhm.
Nebraska. It was like, are you sure? Is this what you want to do? Is this the best fit for you as a player? Because we don't want you to be here for a year and transfer. And I think having that conversation now and really, allowing players the time to make sure that Nebraska is the right fit for them, I think that has helped, minimize some of the transfer departures. You're always going to see some, but we
Yeah.
haven't seen very many from Nebraska, under Matt Rule yet. And I don't think we've seen like a premier player, leave the program and go somewhere else. I mean, I guess we saw, AJ Allen like a couple years ago, but he wasn't recruited by Matt Rule. I don't think we've seen, a Matt Rule recruited player that everyone thought was like going to do something and then transferred. So I feel pretty good. And I think that's why is he has that honest conversation with recruits. And it's probably coming with Christian Jones if it hasn't happened already.
Yeah, and recruits can smell the BS from a mile away, and coaches can do the same thing. And I think it's going to take a very special coach in this age of NIL and transfer portal to kind of navigate all this. And some coaches, can do it, some coaches can't. And I feel like Matt Rule is in the can do it department, and that certainly bodes well for Nebraska moving forward.
So now to get to some, we talked about this a little bit before, the national media, talking about, Nebraska because, JD Pickle has mentioned Nebraska could start 7-0. Joel Klatt has mentioned that Nebraska could start 7-0. And now Andy Staples was doing bold predictions. So keep that in mind. He's not just like throwing this out as like locked in prediction. He's saying one of his bold predictions for this season is that Nebraska football will start 7-0. So with all that in mind, Danny, what do you think? Do you think that that's crazy, or do you think there's actually a chance that Nebraska could start 7-0 this year?
There's definitely a chance that Nebraska could start 7-0, and if that happened, Nebraska fans, myself included, wouldn't know what to do with themselves. I think when you look at the first 6 games of the schedule, the one that sticks out to me as being one of the tougher matchups is Colorado. I think if we can navigate the Colorado game, then I think it's a very real possibility. The back end of the schedule, with Ohio State and USC, may be a little bit tougher. And even then, I'm not sure that USC's defense, I was actually talking about this with somebody the other day. They said, everybody perceives USC as some sort of juggernaut, but they've got, a poor defense, I guess you could say, kind of offense still trying to figure themselves out. So, but anyway, the back end of the schedule is tougher. I could see them starting 7-0. I'm not gonna make a guarantee that will happen, but as long as we can navigate Colorado, I think it's a possibility. I don't think that's necessarily the craziest prediction I've heard.
Yeah, it's not that crazy. It is crazy though how tough the last 5 games are. At Ohio State, home against UCLA, at USC, home against Wisconsin, and at Iowa. So you better get some wins in those. Better get at least 6 wins in those first 7 games, or because there's not a guaranteed win in the last 5. I mean, I'm not
UCLA.
saying
I mean,
it's
UCLA.
definitely a winnable game, but I'm
Yeah.
not saying it's like a guaranteed win. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Yeah.
so the first 7 games, obviously the Colorado one sticks out to me, and then Illinois too. I feel like people underrate Illinois a little bit at times, but Purdue and Indiana on the road, especially Indiana on the road, I just feel like that's going to be a tougher game with their new head coach Kurt,
Yeah.
whatever his last name is, Siganetti or.
Yeah.
So I worry about that a little bit. Those winning Big Ten road games is tough, and we've seen that with Nebraska. They've struggled to win those. They did get a nice road win last year at Illinois. That was a nice victory
Yeah,
for
that
Matt
was.
Rule, but can they win at Indiana and at Purdue? I mean, that right there would be a big step for me, just because I know that feels like something that this program should be able to do, but this is a program that hasn't been able, like if, I went golfing yesterday and like, those winds are like a 2 to 3 foot putt, but Nebraska has missed like 22 to 3 foot putts over the last few years. So, I need to see them make a few of those before I really, really believe it. So, I mean, I think I'd say there's maybe a 50-50 chance if they beat Colorado.
I just remembered the last game at Purdue in overtime. The
Yeah,
overtime
Devin.
loss that just popped in my head right now. I'm like, let's see, when's the last time they won at Purdue? But no, Purdue on the road is tough, and it's always been tough. And Indiana is always tough. So, I mean, it's not going to be easy, obviously, but I do think it can be done. But like we kind of both just alluded to, Nebraska's got to take care of business in those 7 games, because it's going to be a little bit rough sledding once we hit the back end of the schedule.
Matt Rule's confident, though. I mean, he said with the Joe Klatt interview, if you didn't see that on Big Noon Conversations, it was interesting. And Joe Klatt was like, man, it's going to be crazy when Nebraska, has home games at Lincoln Memorial Stadium, in the playoff race, when they're in the playoff race. And Matt Rule's response was, it's just a matter of when that will happen, not if. And I do believe that. I do think we're going to see that happen in the next couple of years, maybe this year, maybe next year. But we'll see. So, but the national media, we've talked about that before. They're definitely drinking the Rule Aid, so to speak. And then one last topic I wanted to mention, we didn't really talk about this before in our lead up, but is the grass greener for Nebraska? So it's kind of a topic of conversation that's been happening. Matt Rule is he's not a fan of the field turf. And, I don't necessarily blame him after coming from the NFL and some of the injuries. So, there's some chatter that grass could be coming to Lincoln Memorial Stadium, which would be, it's never had grass in my entire life. It's always been turf, it was AstroTurf and field turf. So that would be pretty revolutionary change, but one that I would definitely be for. What do you think about grass at Memorial Stadium, Danny? You for or against, or what do you think?
I'm in a wait and see type of mode, because I do know a lot of people who love turf. I do know a lot of people who love grass. I remember talking to the running backs on my college football team, and they always said they liked grass because the movements were more natural in terms of cuts and, kind of stopping quick and things like that. So I'm interested to see how the grass plays out. And, back when I was helping out my college football team, I got to travel to all the games and stuff like that. And there was one natural grass field left by my senior year, and it was kind of interesting, everybody going to turf. But I'm interested to see how the grass plays. I see the pros and cons for both turf and grass, but it's certainly going to be a big change. And, I'm wondering, especially with Nebraska's recent injury history, just overall speaking, I'm not totally against it either. And I'm not saying all the injuries came as a result of grass or turf, but we seem to have had bad injury luck over the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's interesting how everything's kind of shifting from, I guess a big driver of it is the player safety thing. And what's really interesting to me, I think, is that so you have like the World Cup coming to the US in 2026 or whatever, and you have all these football stadiums which are hosting soccer matches, and FIFA won't let the soccer games be played there unless they actually have, natural grass turf. And so it's interesting to me that FIFA's like, no, we won't play on that. It's dangerous, whatever. And the NFL's like, man, every single team has it. No big deal. College football. And so I don't know, grass is more expensive. Like, that's this people, want to think like, oh, field turf is this big expense, but you only really have to do it one time. I mean, there's some maintenance, but grass is much more, you got to water it. It's a whole year round process to keep it,
Especially if multiple sports are on. I remember my high school when we had multiple sports play on grass, and the football team would have the Friday game, and the field would just be absolute mud because of all the games out during the week. Also, a side note, it's hilarious that the U.S. is going to host the World Cup, and the U.S. team, it may not even, they're so bad.
The only reason we'll be in it is because the host team gets the automatic,
they don't deserve to be in it, is what is, I guess I'm saying. But man, they're bad.
Yeah, that was bad, and not a great showing for to have a U.S. I mean, for soccer fan, like the stadium, they were playing a pretty important match, and like the stadium was half full, which usually isn't the case with the U.S. men's soccer. But I think the fans are just like getting fed up with it at this point.
Well, I feel like soccer takes a backseat to every other sport. Like the basketball team we're sending to the Olympics, isn't even, mostly our best players, and we're still, I think, gonna roll. But
yeah,
soccer just kind of takes a backseat, with the exception of the women. The women have been, carrying the torch. But I mean, men's soccer, it's just, it's tough to get traction. I mean, I remember when David Beckham came over to play for the LA Galaxy back in 07, and then Messi came to Inter Miami, and that generated a lot of excitement. But it's had trouble catching on. So I read somewhere that Tim Howard was going to fly to Germany to see if Jurgen Klopp would be interested in coaching, and he would be awesome. But I don't think there's a chance of that happening. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Coaching is a big part of it, though. I think that it was a mistake to bring that coach
yeah,
back, and
yeah,
we Nebraska fans know what poor coaching can do to the program. We know that as well as we know what a great
yeah.
coach can do, and we know what bad coaches can do. So, at any rate, you guys, let's go enjoy your 4th of July. We'll wrap it up there. Please make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, get into the comment section. We'll be back with another episode on Monday. Don't celebrate too hard on America's birthday, so you're not like hungover super crazy tomorrow for Friday. That's kind of crazy. Like, some people might have to go to work on a Friday.
Don't end up like Jason Pierre-Paul with 4 fingers either, everybody. Be safe.
Don't be crazy. Fireworks literally are explosive, so be careful. And don't celebrate too hard. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.